Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. So yeah, happy Monday. It's 10:57 here on a Monday morning, getting done with Thanksgiving, the Thanksgiving holiday, and the some time off. So with Thanksgiving, the break and everything, have about 4 days. Well, actually 3 days off plus the weekend, so it's a lot of time off. So it's kind of nice. Some people had to go back to work the next day on Black Friday, but it's a good time for me. Well, watch a ton of movies anyway, but I watch, you know, on Thanksgiving. I did a Thanksgiving special a couple of days ago and uploaded it. It was a marathon day at my folks. We watched like four movies and ate a ton of food, and it talked all about. I did a video about that, so check that out if you get a chance. I pretty happy with how that video came out. It's pretty funny. It's a little bit long, but and again, I want to thank some of the new folks that have been subscribing to this channel, and also a lot of people have been commenting on the videos, and I really really love that. So, and I've been trying to do keep up the routine with doing videos, you know, almost every day, and always have movies ready or shows ready to go to just upload them. And I have about three or four more that are coming your way, and I just kind of record them as I go. So, and the one thing too that I do pretty differently now is I tend to set a lot of the movies as a premiere, or a lot of the videos as premieres, just to kind of give it a little bit more space and things like that. So I did and I try to mix things up with with this channel, bring in some variety, with different topics, but usually they're always related to film and music and things like that, or my band Quantum. So I did a show yesterday about my big anticipation for Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, and some things I've heard about it. I have a really good friend who got to see it, so very much looking forward to that. That's probably Nosferatu is easily my most anticipated movie for the rest of this year, which is another month or so, and so it's great. And but one idea I thought about, so this is going to be another kind of specialty show, a little bit of a sidebar to a degree, is I wanted to do a show about the whole kind of UFO craze that's going on right now, and then talk about that, and then talk about some of my favorite films about aliens or alien invasion that I think are the best, and ones that have always been have always resonated with me, and movies that I've always gone back to. Because of the news lately, it's been kind of crazy. I mean, the times we live in now are pretty much insane anyway, and I don't know, kind of feel like insanity is the new normal. So, but in recent times, there's been so many developments. Ever since I was a kid, I've always been attracted to UFOs and the occult and all things tied to kind of the darker world. The hunt for Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, UFOs, reading about abductions. I tie that all in together with my love of horror and all of those things. In psychic, I've always really been into people, like one of my favorite writers is Dean Radin, who is a parapsychologist. So I kind of lump all of that stuff together, and I've always been fascinated with UFOs, and the recent developments has been on that front have been pretty unprecedented. With the recent testimony that's been happening in Washington in Congress, where it was about a week, well, almost 2 weeks of straight testifying by all of these government officials. People in the government, in the Pentagon, and all the various forms of the defense part of the military have always been have never been on board with proving any kind of accusations around the UFO phenomenon. But now it's been a thing of where it feels like the tide has changed, and now there's been lots of confirmation by these top government officials that are all of a sudden saying now that a lot of these stories were not hoaxes, and that there even has been contact with alien life forms, and there's been so many videos that have been released that have been taken by military personnel, jet pilots, and what have you, people that at one point were completely dismissing it, and it's been pretty unbelievable um, to see what's kind of happening. I think in our lifetime, or at least in my lifetime, I think there's been some things that are kind of unprecedented that we've been living through. And not just in recent time, but I think, and I equate all of these kinds of times or moments in history as being, you know, seismic things, like things that really can kind of alter the culture, change the the world as we know. And as a kid, I remember as a kid in high school, I remember being young enough to remember the L.A. riots. When that happened, because of the horrendously horrific police brutality by the L.A. police on Rodney King. I remember seeing that in high school, and I believe that happened in. I was about 17, I think, when that happened, and I remember seeing that as a kid. And then which was just culturally, it was just such a shocking and horrific thing to experience. And and having the experience like millions of other people, 9/11, just unprecedented. And then, of course, probably the biggest thing, the most seismic event I think I've ever experienced, and probably for most people, is the arrival of COVID. And and then the George Floyd riots that happened, with in the past few years. The just so many events that they've had such a magnitude. The Capitol riots, just just that experience alone, that never even at the height of the Civil War, the Confederates never made it that close to D.C. and it's an unparalleled time in history. And I feel like with all of these revelations around the UFO phenomenon and all of these testimonies that are happening, just unbelievable. But the thing that I find is that, like, nobody seems to really care about these events. Um, and I think it's like, I don't know. I had saw a post by a friend about kind of humankind's problem of not really, using the past as a history, where basically a lot of the same things historically kind of repeat themselves, and nobody really seems to take heed of it, or it doesn't really change anything. And it's just kind of this never-ending cycle of violence that occurs or hatred that occurs, and people don't seem, as a society, people don't seem to really ever change or really hold on to things. It's interesting, and I find that, like, it's almost like we live in this world of where those things I mentioned don't seem to really it's like it never happened. And there seems to be such a lack of empathy by people, in general. And I've just been really, the thing I've been moved the most by with all of this, with all I've been watching, I've watched most of all of the testimony at Congress about the UAPs and UFOs and all of the phenomenon that's been happening around the world, and these documents and photos and videos being released that were, at one point sealed, and it seems like we're getting more and more, information as we go. I've just, that itself has been just, kind of earth shattering and so interesting, and just, seeing where this whole thing will go. But the thing that's kind of overshadowed that in such a weird way is that it seems like nobody gives a shit about it. Nobody cares. There's no, like, there's a lot of coverage of it. There's a few YouTube channels, and there is an audience that is deeply interested in this whole, this whole story, obviously. But as a culture and just your general folks out there, it doesn't seem like people really even care. It's kind of astounding to me. And again, this all of these things could, maybe tomorrow they'll be proven to be false, or what have you. But if they're not proven to be false, and in fact, it seems the trajectory of where this whole thing is going, it seems for all intents and purposes that um, some of these things could be proven as far as there being another intelligence, another civilization in this world, possibly of higher intelligence than us. And if that is true, I mean, when you really think of the ramifications of what that can do to of what that means for our civilization, it's an endless amount of things to unpack and to think about. Philosophic, as far as looking at it philosophically, our the way we, our view of religion, politics. I mean, just everything. So we'll see. But the lack of interest by the general public has been the thing for me in a weird way that's almost overshadowed that. So I've been thinking about that, those things very much, and I've been watching lots of videos, and I've always had an interest in this phenomenon, but I've been really kind of glued to the screen lately, and I've been checking out lots of different shows around this subject, and it's been really fascinating. Again, like I said, I've watched most of the testimony. Um, so that spurred the idea of, okay, tied to movies. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna talk about some of the movies that I feel that deal with like alien invasion, that deal with extraterrestrials, movies that I feel are the most gripping films in that genre. And I feel like there's definitely a handful of films. There's one movie in particular which I think is one of the greatest kind of sci-fi movies ever made dealing with this subject, and it's a film by Denis Villeneuve, The Arrival. I think that movie is just such a total experience. I I remember it's such an emotional movie, but it's such a beautifully well crafted movie. I love that movie to death. I got into Denis Villeneuve as a director quite a few years ago. I think the first movie I ever saw that turned me on to Denis Villeneuve as a director was Prisoners, starring Hugh Jackman, which is just an extraordinary movie. If you've never seen that movie, Hugh Jackman, Jake Gyllenhaal, an amazing film. That was the first movie I saw that of Denis Villeneuve. It was his first movie that I saw, and I think it might have been at that point his second film. And ever since that movie, I've kind of gotten obsessed with him as a director. He's one of my favorite directors. I pretty much have all of his films on Blu-ray. And but The Arrival, I think that movie is such a special movie. I think that's one of the greatest science fiction films about the potential or the fallout of a true close encounter, if there is to a degree contact with an alien species or race. And it's an extraordinary movie. I remember getting a chance. I saw that in the theater when it came out. And I was just completely blown away by it. One and then another film and book, which was probably the book or story, and later on the film that got me really interested in this subject. Whitley Strieber's Communion. That is one of, well, I think it's actually it's definitely a book on my, if I had to pick my top 10 or top 20 books of all time, Whitley Strieber's Communion would be on there. That book, I remember reading that book when I was probably in like seventh or eighth grade, and I've read it once or twice since then. I want to read it again, but that book I think is not only one of the most interesting, but it is a terrifying book. Like, it's truly terrifying. And Whitley Strieber um, is a and was back then. He was a very prolific writer who wrote a lot of uh, fiction, and he was a very well known writer. And he was also, when it came to UFOs and the UFO phenomenon, he was pretty skeptical of the whole of that entire world. And I remember even he would talk about his views of that phenomenon, in interviews, and saying how, basically how skeptical he was about it. But he had an extraordinary experience where he claimed that he was not only visited by aliens, but that he was also abducted. And at the time when this abduction and this whole story and his whole account emerged, again, he was a very well established writer at that time, and he had a cabin in upstate New York, I believe, and he had a series of these really horrific events that happened to him, and so he wrote this book Communion, and the book Communion is all about the experience of his claims and what he felt like he experienced around being abducted, taken out of his home, and the how it affected his life. And I think it's, from a literary standpoint, I think it's just an incredible book. Like, it's an amazing book, but if you're a fan of horror, and if you're a fan of the UFO craze or phenomenon, I mean, it's got all of those elements. Only the thing that's a little bit more unsettling about this movie or story is that it's not you know, I believe some of the things were probably true in the book, but it's looked at, and he treated that book as a work of nonfiction. And I believe at that point that was his first book that he ever wrote that was about a nonfiction story, and it's his personal journey. And he's written about three or four other books about that subject since then. And I haven't read any of those books, but the one that is just an extraordinary book, and I want to buy it again, is I don't think I think I lost my copy of it somehow. But again, it's I highly recommend Communion. It's one of my favorite books of all time. But later on, I think it was maybe 5 or 10 years later, that book was adapted into a film, and the film is actually really really great too, and it stars Christopher Walken, who plays Whitley Strieber in this film, and it's a kind of a lower budget film, kind of an indie film, but really really great. I have not seen that film in a very long time, but I remember really loving it. I've seen it probably 5 or 6 times. I do want to revisit it again. I don't own, yeah, I don't own it on Blu-ray or DVD. The Arrival I have on Blu-ray. I have a really amazing copy of that. But Communion, it's a really great adaptation, and the book, obviously, I think the book is better than the movie. But I think the thing that with the film, I remember, which makes it a very intense experience. Well, Christopher Walken, obviously, but the film really kind of delves into um, the experience that Whitley Strieber claimed that he had. It dives deep into the psychological world that he felt he was being thrust into, and it's a very the book, well, the movie itself too visually, it's a very hallucinatory experience. It's traumatic, it's kind of horrific, it's disturbing, it's psychedelic, but really a really great film, and it's a really great adaptation of an amazing book. And so again, when I was thinking about doing this video, I was like, okay, I want to talk about this obvious subject, but then obviously tie it in with films that I feel are really great, representation or representations of this kind of phenomenon, but brought to the big screen. And another film that I think is truly one of the most, I think it's got a series of scenes or sequences in the film that I think are some of the most terrifying things ever captured on screen. And not just in terms as far as films about aliens or alien invasions or alien abductions. I think almost in general, like if you're a fan of horror, like truly nightmarish horror that gets under your skin. And I've talked about that before, where you know, as horror is my favorite genre, and but really, there's like as many horror films as I watch. The group of films that exist in the world that I feel that are films that are really generally scary and films that really get under your skin and give you nightmares and really stick with you. You know, compare when you think of the genre of horror, it's again, it's an endless rabbit hole. There are so many, a millions of films. But the group of films that I feel are truly terrifying, I would say were is relatively um, exclusive or a little on the smaller side, really. Generally, I think great horror films have a real gothic kind of appeal. It's the world building, a really great, rich atmosphere. A lot of horror films tend to have a very creepy factor. A lot of great films. Uh, you know, that's one of the reasons I love Italian horror films so much, because of the atmosphere, and it's so rich and you can taste it. And it puts you in this really unsettling place and takes you on this scary journey. But I think there's a difference with that, compared to, say, when you watch, well, like films that I generally think are just outwardly terrifying and scary, where they legitimately get under your skin. I look at that as it's a little bit of a different thing. Films that I've talked about this before in other videos, but movies that I can think off the top of my head in the horror genre that I feel are legitimately terrifying and legitimately scary. Because at the end of the day, that's why we watched them. But these films are a little bit of a breed apart. I think Takashi Miike's The Audition is easily one of the most terrifying movies ever made. That movie I've seen so many times. I don't know if I own it on Blu-ray. I don't think I do, which is a crime. I have a really great DVD copy of it. And I've seen that movie so many times. If I don't know why I can't remember, but if I don't have it on Blu-ray, it's a crime. I need to get that upgraded. Takashi Miike's The Audition, one of the most terrifying movies ever made. Every time I watch that movie, I it kind of gives me nightmares. Takashi Miike, again, one of the greatest, one of my favorite directors, famous Japanese director. He's made some really great horror films, but samurai movies. He's cross genres, and he's just an incredible filmmaker. One of the best. But The Audition is one of the most terrifying films, and I think like William Friedkin's The Exorcist. I think the original Exorcist is easily one of the most terrifying films. Where it's legitimately scary and gets under your skin. I also think that Steven Spielberg's Jaws. I think that film is a very scary film. The opening sequence of that movie, I think, is generally terrifying. And that movie, really scared the shit out of people for generations. It still does. More modern films, I think, a movie that or movies that I feel have that essence. Well, I'd say The Blair Witch Project, easily one of the most terrifying films ever made. That, of course, started an entire genre, the found footage genre. Easily one of the most terrifying movies ever made. And I think The Babadook is another film, a more modern film that I think is a truly, truly scary film. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is another one. I think that movie truly is terrifying. That movie's always given me nightmares, and I still, as many times, Stanley Kubrick being my favorite director, but as many times as I've seen that movie, I still get that same feeling of real horror and being really disturbed at times. And it never wears off for me. Um, I even think too, Sinister with Ethan Hawke. The first time I saw that movie, it terrified me. It gave me nightmares. And not that I'm tooting my own horn, but for coming from me, I think it means a lot or says a lot because how many horror films I watch, how invested I am in that world, and a truly terrifying movie. I have that on Blu-ray. I really think Hereditary is a really terrifying film. When I first saw that film, it got under my skin generally. And there's a list of films, and I think this last movie I'm going to be talking about tied in with alien abduction, Fire in the Sky, which came out quite a few years ago, but it's called Fire in the Sky, and it's based on a book which I haven't read, but it's based on these accounts of these men who were tree cutters. They were lumberjacks, and their account of one of their friends and colleagues being abducted in the woods. And it is truly, again, there are certain scenes in this film that are just so utterly terrifying. It's literally like the things that nightmares are made of. And as a whole, the film itself is really good. I don't really feel, nor do I think that this movie is ever talked about enough. I think it's not just a great alien film or about that subject, this subject I'm talking about, but as a horror film, it is, it's amazing. It's amazing. The thing that's so unsettling about that film, because it doesn't paint, the idea of that the aliens are very nice, or there's going to be a peaceful meeting or peaceful, coexistence. It it portrays the aliens as being the experience as completely and utterly being held captive and being completely um, having all of your power stripped away, every from everything that you have, and being enslaved, but completely being broken in every way. And it's yeah, again, it's I think it's one of the one of the scariest movies ever made. And there's two or three sequences in this movie. I don't think that this movie is ever talked about enough. I don't really hear anything about this movie. This would be a movie, and again, I don't own it. I have seen it. Uh, I I've rented it a shit ton of times at Opera House Video, And this is a movie I never hear talked about. I do need to buy it on Blu-ray. I definitely need an upgrade with it. But I think there are certain sequences in this movie that are just some of the most horrific and terrifying scenes ever captured on the big screen, hands down. And it's a really great film. It's a really well done film. The thing that's the most terrifying about this movie is that the true life, the characters that this film is based on. Towards the end of the film, all of the men that were involved and that were supposed witnesses to this abduction, they all like take lie detector tests, and I think they take more than one. I think they each take two of them. And the thing about this film is their friend ends up, going missing for a few days. And so what ends up happening is they eventually get, after time goes by, they get accused of basically killing and, you know, and they end up being accused of being the ones for making him disappear. All and they were charged with. I think at one point they were even charged with murder, and they but then all of the charges were dropped, and they got but it destroyed their lives. But the thing that's most terrifying is like during this whole thing of when they eventually got he they eventually found him again. He came back, but then when they talk about what they went through, through all these accusations, all of the men involved got a series of lie detector tests, and they passed they passed every test with flying colors, and it's truly terrifying. So, yeah, I wanted to make a little show about this subject that I've always had a real interest in, and for obvious reasons, I've really taken a further, deeper dive into the subject of UFO phenomenon more recently because of obvious reasons. And then I wanted to talk about films that are definitely tied to this whole subject that I think are some of the best or the best in the genre. So thanks again, and I highly recommend checking out any of these movies if you get a chance. So we will see you next time. Peace.